Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful for You channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The tension in the Forrester living room was practically suffocating, a heavy mix of disbelief, betrayal, and curiosity hanging in the air like storm clouds ready to burst, as Remy Forrester, standing rigid with nerves that he struggled to hide behind a facade of stoic calm, finally summoned the courage to declare aloud the secret he had carried for years, a revelation so monumental it threatened to upend the carefully curated balance of the Forrester family and everyone connected to them. "I'm a Forrester," he said, his voice cracking slightly with the weight of the confession, a statement that instantly drew gasps from those gathered, including Ridge, Steffi, and Taylor, all of whom were frozen mid-step in the living room, eyes wide, mouths slightly agape, as if the words themselves were physically staggering them, a ripple of shock coursing through each family member like electricity, and for a moment, the normally controlled Ridge could only stare, his jaw tightening, while Steffi instinctively took a step back, her mind racing through the implications, wondering how this revelation could be true. How could Remy, someone she had grown up knowing only as a peripheral figure, now claim a blood tie to the family, and what it meant for her own sense of identity and her relationships with Liam, Hope, and the rest of the Forrester clan, all while Taylor's medical precise mind tried to process the probability of such a secret being kept under wraps for so long, and the questions tumbled relentlessly: why now, how, and most importantly, what had prompted Remy to reveal this information at this precise, chaotic moment when family tensions were already high, and the undercurrent of past betrayals and rivalries made every declaration feel like a spark in a powder keg, the air thick with disbelief as Felicia, seated quietly in the corner and struggling to maintain her composure, now looked on with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation, the realization finally dawning on her that Remy's truth would now place her at the center of an emotional storm, her own carefully guarded secrets suddenly exposed, threatening to undo years of personal strategy, control, and emotional boundaries, as she had long been the quiet stabilizer behind the Forrester empire. And now the revelation of her maternal link to Remy would throw not only her own life into disarray but also reverberate through every corner of the Forrester legacy, igniting debates, whispers, and speculations among those present, especially Ridge, whose paternal instincts collided with the corporate pragmatism he maintained at Forrester Creations, leaving him torn between welcoming Remy into the fold as family, acknowledging the undeniable bloodline connection, and confronting the history of secrecy and the potential disruption to both family and business alliances, while Steffi, always perceptive yet emotionally volatile, struggled to reconcile her initial shock with her instinctive protective nature toward her own children, wondering how this revelation might complicate her relationship with Finn, who had recently been navigating complex emotions surrounding Luna, and whether this news could bring unforeseen complications into her already delicate balancing of love, loyalty, and ambition. As she watched Remy, his eyes reflecting vulnerability masked by determination, knowing that he had chosen this moment, despite the chaos, because he believed in honesty, in reclaiming his identity, and in forging connections that had been denied him. Even as Taylor, representing both the voice of reason and the empathetic guidance of a mother figure to many in the family, now found herself mediating between shock and acceptance, analyzing the potential psychological impact on each family member, particularly the younger Forrester generation, who may feel threatened, confused, or inspired by the sudden expansion of their family tree, while Felicia herself, caught between relief at finally having her son acknowledged and fear of judgment, criticism, or resentment from Ridge and the others, struggled to articulate her feelings, her usual poise momentarily slipping as she realized that all the whispered conversations, missed calls, and careful manipulations that had kept this secret hidden were now rendered irrelevant, the truth blazing like a beacon too bright to ignore. And even as the room seemed to hold its collective breath, the subtle tension between Ridge and Felicia, between past indiscretions and current consequences, created a delicate dance, each movement measured yet charged with emotion, with Ridge questioning what this revelation meant for his own legacy, for the Forrester name, and for the alliances he had so painstakingly constructed over decades of business maneuvering, while Steffi, reflecting a blend of youthful defiance and inherited Forrester strength, felt the stirrings of curiosity and empathy, a desire to understand Remy, too. embrace him cautiously yet warmly as a newfound sibling, even as the implications for inheritance, emotional loyalties, and family dynamics threatened to destabilize the fragile equilibrium, and throughout this emotional maelstrom, Remy's own internal struggle unfolded, a cocktail of relief, pride, fear, and anticipation, as he navigated the reactions of those who had long been strangers to him in a familial sense, though connected by blood, while Felicia, finding her voice amidst the tension, began to speak softly, explaining the circumstances that had led to secrecy, the protective instincts that had guided her choices, the fear of judgment and rejection, and the hope that honesty now, in the present, could pave the way for understanding and acceptance, a sentiment that hung in the air, mingling with Ridge's guarded skepticism, Steffi's cautious curiosity, and Taylor's methodical, nurturing analysis, all of which created a complex web of emotional and relational dynamics, further intensified by the presence of others in the extended Forrester circle, whose eyes flicked between speaker and listener, absorbing nuances, calculating consequences, and wondering how this revelation might ripple outward, potentially influencing business decisions, romantic entanglements, and the future of Forrester Creations itself, while the dramatic tension escalated as subtle gestures, an exchanged glance, a soft intake of breath, a hesitant step forward, communicated as much as words, highlighting the fragility and complexity of familial bonds, the unspoken history that had preceded the revelation, and the potential for both healing and conflict, as each character processed not only the truth of Remy's lineage but also the personal implications. Ridge confronting his legacy and sense of paternal authority, Steffi examining her evolving family identity, Taylor balancing emotional empathy with pragmatic foresight, and Felicia negotiating her long-suppressed maternal instincts with the reality of public acknowledgement, a delicate interplay of emotion, logic, and instinct, as the revelation continued to reverberate in the room, carrying with it echoes of past decisions, unspoken regrets, long-buried hopes, and the uncertain promise of a future in which Remy could finally step out of the shadows and claim his place among the Forresters, a place that was simultaneously rightfully his and fraught with complication, each family member now confronted with the choice of embracing this expanded familial reality or allowing old grievances, insecurities, and rivalries to dictate their responses. And as Remy stood there, shoulders squared, eyes steady yet filled with vulnerability, he silently hoped that the truth, however disruptive, could ultimately lead to connection, understanding, and perhaps the tentative forging of bonds long denied, all while the Forrester home, a place of legacy, ambition, love, and occasional betrayal, bore witness to the unfolding of a revelation that would challenge assumptions, stir emotions, provoke reflection, and, in its own chaotic, dramatic way, reaffirm that family, no matter how complicated, secret-laden, or strained, remained at the center of every Forrester story, every corporate decision, and every emotional heartbeat, marking a turning point that would shape relationships, legacies, and the intricate tapestry of life in the world of the bold and the beautiful in ways that no one could have anticipated, as Remy's declaration, simple in words but monumental in consequence, hung in the air, demanding acknowledgement, contemplation, and, ultimately, action, setting the stage for heartfelt confrontations, reconciliations, and the inexorable intertwining of destiny, identity, and the inescapable bonds of blood, love, and family. The revelation had barely left Remy's lips, "I'm a Forrester," when the room seemed to simultaneously shrink and expand, an invisible gravitational pull drawing every eye, every thought, every unspoken fear and hope toward him, and for a long, heavy moment, the Forrester family, the very epicenter of Los Angeles fashion, legacy, and personal drama, seemed suspended in a state of disbelief so profound that Ridge, normally so commanding, so utterly composed in both boardroom and living room, could barely formulate a single coherent thought, his mind spinning through decades of memories, betrayals, and family politics, each flashback a reminder of the complex web of loyalties and resentments that had always defined the Forrester family, while his hand, almost unconsciously, clenched into a fist at the weight of this unexpected truth, the implication that Felicia, the free-spirited, vibrant, and oft-overlooked Forrester sibling, had carried a child in secret, a child who had now re-emerged, claiming his rightful place within the dynasty, igniting in Ridge a mixture of awe, anger, and incredulity, a cocktail of emotions that made it nearly impossible for him to speak without first processing the tectonic shift in family structure, even as Steffi, standing slightly behind him, felt her own carefully curated world tilt precariously, her thoughts racing faster than she could articulate, envisioning every possible scenario. How would Liam react to yet another sibling in the family? What would this mean for Finn, for Kelly and Hayes, for the delicate balance of influence she had always maintained over her inner circle, and how could she reconcile her instinctive desire to embrace Remy as a brother with the lingering suspicion and fear that any new connection might come with unforeseen consequences? A recurring nightmare of betrayal and heartbreak that had haunted her since adolescence and now threatened to resurface in vivid, almost suffocating clarity. And Taylor, ever the mediator and the one who had spent countless hours trying to maintain equilibrium within the often chaotic Forrester household, felt herself entering a familiar yet heightened role, weighing every word, every gesture, every possibility for emotional fallout, analyzing Remy's posture, his tone, the tremor in his voice that betrayed vulnerability beneath the bravado, while simultaneously considering the long-term implications for the younger generation, who might now view the Forrester family as both more inclusive and infinitely more complicated, a dynamic that could create new alliances, spark jealousy, and challenge every relationship carefully cultivated over the years, particularly those entwined with romantic entanglements, professional rivalries, and the unspoken but omnipresent expectation of loyalty to the Forrester name. Felicia herself, her heart hammering against her ribcage like a drumbeat of truth long suppressed, now faced a paradox of emotion so intense it threatened to overwhelm her usual composure, relief and pride mixing dangerously with fear and regret, as she realized that years of secrecy, concealment, and personal sacrifice had reached a climax where the past could no longer be contained, and the room, once a familiar sanctuary of family and familiarity, had transformed into a crucible of revelation, judgment, and potential reconciliation, with every eye, every subtle shift in posture, every exhalation or hesitation amplifying the gravity of the moment. And as Felicia opened her mouth to speak, her words were almost drowned out by the collective intake of breath from Ridge, Steffi, Taylor, and even minor onlookers who had been drawn into the emotional epicenter, each processing the seismic shift in their own way, their inner monologues running at a speed that made the physical world around them seem almost painfully slow, with Ridge struggling to reconcile the revelation with his identity as a father, brother, and Forrester heir, Steffi navigating the treacherous terrain of empathy, curiosity, and self-preservation, Taylor analyzing psychological, emotional, and familial ramifications, and Felicia, navigating maternal instinct, long-buried guilt, and the desperate hope for acceptance, all while Remy, standing at the center of this whirlwind, felt an intoxicating mix of liberation and vulnerability, the culmination of years spent on the periphery, watching the Forrester family's triumphs, tragedies, and endless dramas unfold, longing for recognition, and now finally demanding it, the mere act of declaring his lineage igniting a series of subtle yet explosive chain reactions, Ridge's mind already calculating potential impact on boardroom politics and brand perception at Forrester Creations, Steffi imagining how this revelation might alter her children's understanding of family, her own legacy, and her capacity to protect those she loved, Taylor mentally rehearsing every possible intervention to minimize fallout, Felicia struggling to reconcile joy with apprehension, while Remy, though courageous in his revelation, felt the invisible weight of judgment pressing from every angle, sensing the historical grievances, the unspoken resentments, and the deep, tangled web of family loyalty that could either embrace him or reject him, and yet, in spite of the overwhelming uncertainty, a fragile hope glimmered that this long concealed truth could finally offer him a sense of belonging, a tangible link to a lineage he had only ever dreamed of being part of, all while the room's charged atmosphere seemed to vibrate with the unspoken tension between love and suspicion, past and present, secrecy and revelation, the complex dynamics of sibling rivalry and parental expectation, and the immediate, visceral emotional responses of each individual whose life had now been irrevocably altered by a single statement. And as the minutes stretched, filled with pregnant pauses, stolen glances, and subtle shifts of energy, Ridge finally broke the silence, his voice measured but heavy with emotion, questioning Felicia, questioning Remy, questioning the very sequence of choices that had led to this moment, while Steffi, unable to contain the storm of questions inside her mind, asked aloud about the timing, the truth behind Felicia's decision, the impact on family business, and how Remy's presence would influence existing dynamics, and Taylor, taking in the scene with both analytical precision and maternal empathy, considered not only immediate emotional needs but also the long-term implications for psychological well-being, family cohesion, and intergenerational dynamics, all while Remy, absorbing each reaction, each word, each emotional tremor, realized that the path ahead would be as challenging as it was exhilarating, requiring him to navigate a labyrinth of resentment, curiosity, love, and expectation, to prove his authenticity, loyalty, and desire to be recognized not only as Felicia's son but as a legitimate part of the Forrester legacy, while Felicia herself, summoning courage, began to recount the hidden chapters of her life, the circumstances that led to secrecy, the protective instincts that guided her choices, the moments of anguish and longing for connection, and the hope that, finally, truth would pave the way for understanding, healing, and a new era of family unity, a confession that rippled through the room, touching each heart differently, challenging preconceptions, forging new bonds, and threatening old ones, all while the intangible yet palpable energy of the Forrester home, so often witness to triumphs, betrayals, romances, and corporate intrigue, seemed to shift, bending around the revelation, accommodating new truths, and silently urging the family to confront, adapt, and, ultimately, embrace the evolving tapestry of relationships, legacies, and identities that defined them, in a single moment, in a single breath, in a single declaration that Remy Forrester, for the first time in his life, could truly claim the name, the bloodline, and the family that had always been part of him even when it had seemed impossibly out of reach, and in that room, charged with history, love, tension, and hope, the words, "I'm a Forrester," resonated with a force that would echo through future conflicts, reconciliations, romances, boardroom battles, and tender moments, ensuring that this revelation would not only reshape relationships but also redefine the very essence of what it meant to be a Forrester, and that even as emotions swirled, debates ignited, and allegiances shifted, a fragile, enduring truth emerged: family, in all its messy, complicated, passionate glory, would always demand attention, loyalty, and, most importantly, the courage to reveal one's true self, no matter the cost, setting the stage for decades of drama, reconciliation, and, inevitably, love, as the Forrester legacy expanded, adapted, and grew to include Remy, Felicia's son, newly revealed, newly accepted, and irrevocably part of the tapestry of the bold and the beautiful. The moment Remy finally declared, his voice quivering just enough to betray the years of suppression, "I'm a Forrester," the entire Forrester living room seemed to buckle under the weight of a revelation that was equal parts shocking, electrifying, and devastating, a truth that sent a seismic wave through the very foundations of the Forrester family, and for an instant, time itself seemed suspended as Ridge, usually the unshakable patriarch, felt a surge of conflicting emotions so intense he wasn't sure whether to recoil, embrace, or demand an explanation, his mind racing through decades of memories, Felicia's occasional absences, whispered phone calls that now took on a new, haunting significance, moments of maternal sacrifice and subtle estrangement that had previously seemed inconsequential but now hinted at a carefully guarded secret, and he struggled to reconcile the stoic, orderly life he thought he understood with the chaotic, hidden truth now unraveling before his eyes, while Steffi, absorbing every subtle inflection in Remy's voice, felt her carefully constructed reality teeter on the edge of collapse, the mental gymnastics of processing a new sibling, the implications for her own children, the potential threat to the alliances she had nurtured with Liam, Finn, and Hope, and the unspoken dread that this revelation might disrupt her control over both personal and professional spheres, all while her heart thrummed with a mix of cautious excitement and visceral fear. Wondering whether the Forrester family could actually expand to embrace Remy without igniting jealousy, insecurity, or outright conflict, and Taylor, ever the voice of reason but also intimately attuned to the emotional undercurrents, calculated with precision the psychological impact on each member present, mapping out potential fractures and opportunities, realizing that the revelation was not merely personal but had ramifications that would ripple through boardroom decisions at Forrester creations, romantic entanglements, intergenerational loyalty, and even public perception, while simultaneously feeling a deep, protective impulse toward Remy, a recognition of courage and vulnerability, tempered by the need to guide the family through this unexpected upheaval with empathy and strategy, and Felicia, seated quietly yet trembling internally, experienced a maelstrom of relief, pride, fear, and guilt, the culmination of years of secrecy, careful avoidance, and maternal instinct now. Confronting the raw, unvarnished truth that her child, her son, had finally claimed his identity, forcing her to navigate the perilous path between self-preservation, hope for acceptance, and the haunting question of whether the family she loved could forgive, understand, or even truly accept the choices she had made to protect him, while Remy himself, standing at the center of this storm, felt the intoxicating, terrifying duality of liberation and exposure, the satisfaction of honesty tempered by the heavy weight of judgment, the anticipation of familial resistance, and the hopeful possibility of connection, belonging, and finally stepping into the Forrester legacy that had always existed within him even when hidden from view. And as these initial shocks rippled outward, subtle but explosive interpersonal dynamics ignited, Ridge's gaze, a careful mix of scrutiny, lingering hurt, and latent affection, fell upon Felicia with unspoken questions about loyalty, history, and timing, while Steffi's eyes flickered between skepticism and empathy, her mind rapidly calculating how Remy's presence might affect her children, her romantic entanglements, and her influence over the family enterprise. And Taylor, silent for a moment yet brimming with analytical intensity, assessed each emotional reaction, predicting possible outcomes, preparing interventions, and weighing how to maintain cohesion in a household suddenly fractured by truth. And then Felicia, summoning courage, began to recount her long-hidden story, each word carrying the weight of years spent in secrecy, the sacrifices made to protect a son who had been forced to live in the shadows, the anguish of watching family milestones pass by without her presence fully recognized, the desperate hope that her honesty now could bridge the chasm of time, and the confession triggered a cascade of flashbacks and introspection. Ridge remembered moments of inexplicable tension between Felicia and the family, the tiny hints of a life lived partially in secret, the choices that had seemed arbitrary but now revealed a careful, protective strategy. Steffi recalled times she had sensed Felicia's absence in her own life and wondered if intuition